get by. It resides between my eyes. Walk through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I feel like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Wise here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. Today is no different. I'm here with Mark Scrimenti of Vivid Path Consulting. And before I formally introduce you, Mark, I always like to point out other episodes people should check out of the podcast. And since we're going to be kind of geeking out on frameworks, because Mark loves frameworks and uses a lot of frameworks in his work, you can check out the interview I did with Gino Wickman, who's the author of Traction and other books. I did interview with Mark Winters, which is the author of Rocket Fuel, which is great, talking about the visionary integrator, and Mark's going to speak to that as well. So check out those and many more on InspiredInsider.com. This episode is brought to you by Rise 25. At Rise 25, we help businesses give to and connect to their Dream 100 relationships. And how do we do that? We help you run your podcast. We actually are an easy button for a business to launch and run your podcast. And, for me, Mark, the number one thing in my life is relationships. I'm always looking at ways to give to my best relationships. And I found no better way to do that than to profile the people and companies I most admire and have them on my podcast over the past decade. So if you have thought about podcasting, you should. If you have questions, you can go to rise25.com to learn more. We have lots of free content on our podcast, and you can feel free to email us anytime with questions. So I'm excited to introduce Mark Scrimenti. He's a fractional COO and leadership coach, and he's dedicated to building purpose-driven businesses for sustainable profitability and maximum impact. He's done some research, and one of the frameworks he's looked at is the B Corp framework, which we're going to talk a little bit about. And he learned the ins and outs of growing a business and leading the scale up of an online retailer from $40 million to over $140 million in sales. And since then, he's been working with small to medium-sized businesses to develop and implement and execute the operational infrastructure, the teams, the growth strategies, basically anything they need to get to that next level. So, Mark, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Jeremy. It's great to be here.
Talk about Vivid Path Consulting, and I know I introduced a little bit about what you do, but fill in some of the details.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That was a long intro. It's very generous.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a fractional COO, and I don't know if everybody knows what fractional is. I find that maybe about half the people I meet still don't. So maybe I'll touch on that. And that means that I am working for multiple companies simultaneously, on a part-time basis. So I usually have 2 to 3 clients at one time. I also do coaching. That's a separate part of my business. Although being a COO, especially on a fractional basis, typically involves a lot of coaching as well. A lot of the companies I work for are sort of in their infancy. They're $1 to $2 million in growth, looking to get to that next level. I work with larger companies as well, but I think that $2 million is kind of a breaking point. So there's different skills and activities involved, lifting from that first stage to the second stage versus further up on the ladder. But I work in the business, so I'm not a consultant. Like I'm not dropping 16 pounds of paper on your desk and saying, I've diagnosed all your problems. Here are my wise solutions. Good luck. And by the way, you got to pay me right now. It's more like I'm in the business on a basis. It could be once a week, it could be twice a week, but I'm managing people. I'm working with your employers. I'm a member of your team. And the advantage of working with a fractional person is, I bring the experience and skills. But you don't need a full-time person. So at this point, and you probably couldn't afford one, but what I can do in a shorter period of time could be just what you need to get you to the next level. And I can usually accelerate that growth faster just because I've done it before.
What's a common stage, Mark, that's a good fit for you, right? Where they're like, you know what, we're at that kind of awkward stage where we really can't afford a full-time COO. Because I know eventually what you do is you get them to a place where they can, and you help even hire and train and find that COO.
Right.
as well. So what's that first stage where someone's like, you know what, maybe they don't even know it yet, but like, I think we need a Mark.
Yeah. I think, ideally, like a minimum of 2 million in revenue, maybe 10 people, at least 10 people. Um, I've worked with companies smaller than that and bigger than that. But I think first of all, having a sense of who we are, a purpose, a mission, and a vision. If you don't have one, I can help you define one. And that is something that I really enjoy doing, because I think you need to start with purpose. It's like starting with why, and you build for growth from the inside out. Um, but some kind of commitment to a framework, or at least a willingness to use a framework like EOS is something, and do the entrepreneurial operating system. We're going to talk about frameworks. That's a great one. It's a management framework. And it's a whole, full process for managing and growing a business. If you interviewed Gino Wickman, you know all about it. He literally wrote the book on it. Um, but so you're starting there with this, the kind of what's your long-term vision, and you're working backwards from there. If somebody wants to use EOS, they need to be committed to it, because if somebody isn't really committed, if it's kind of a toe in the water, it's not likely to work. So that's a big part of it. I would also say, ideally you have an implementer to help you implement it. I've done self-implementations before, but there's a reason why there are implementers. They can really set things up the right way and help prepare the team to do it, so that doesn't fall all on the integrator with limited time. But in any case, I think it's that level of commitment, and it's I think a lot has to do with having a team in place. Now, you may not have your ideal team in place. Most people don't. And usually at these inflection points, that's sometimes when people start to outgrow their old team. So that's a tricky situation that I have found myself in many times. Like, it's a transitional period. So, how are you going to do that effectively and with sensitivity and care? But somebody who's committed to change. So I think a lot of it has to do with the CEO, because it starts with the visionary CEO. And how committed are they to the business? Is this just a lifestyle business for them? What are their longer term plans? Do they have an exit strategy in mind? And really fit, because and that's something that you explore early on, but you don't really know until you get in with it. Into the work itself is a real openness, a willingness to be challenged, for example, to think of things differently. Like if somebody has to be right all the time, or if it's autocratic, that's not likely going to work. I mean, because like what got you here isn't going to get you there. So you have to be willing to change, and you have to have at least some awareness of that. So these are, key things that I would look for in a client when having the first set of conversations. But having some structure in place is nice, because rather than starting from scratch, from chaos. And I've done that as well. Like no standard operating procedures. The system is a mess. Nobody's using it consistently. It was never set up properly. Nobody was ever trained. Nobody knows what their job description is. Like I've worked in those kinds of environments as well too, and that just takes longer, and it's probably not the best use of my time. Some of that is better suited to a project manager, for example.
I want to touch on a couple things you mentioned there, because you mentioned some of the changes needed. Sometimes you outgrow the old team, you need to hire new people. You also mentioned mistakes people make. So I want to talk about the changes that you see people need to make, right? And what got them, where they're at is not going to get them to the next level. So you come in, a company's $2 million in revenue, and they're 10 people. What are some of those changes or common things that you see? You mentioned one, which is outgrowing the old team. What are some of the other changes you have seen that need to be implemented when you come in?
Some will have to do with the owner or the founder CEO giving up responsibilities or tasks that they've always done, and perhaps that they can do better than anyone. But as long as they're working in the business, they're not going to be able to work on the business, and they need to be working on the business. And that may include sales, for example. Now, sales is a tough one because you need somebody selling, and sometimes the top person is by far and away the best salesperson. If so, that's probably what they should be doing most of the time, as long as they have the infrastructure to support it, which is not always the case. So, that's a balancing act too. Like you could sell way too much. And I've seen that too, where, okay, now we have a ton of business and nobody knows actually what we're doing for these clients. How you can churn clients really quickly if you're not set up to service them. And so like sometimes it makes sense to, turn down the throttle and let's focus a little bit elsewhere. Like we don't even have the right people in place yet. Like, you don't even have an account manager, for example. Or if you don't have SOPs in place, and you write a vague statement of work, people will look at it as like, okay, well, what did we promise the client? Like, what are we delivering to the client? And then if you have 12 of them, coming through the pipeline, it can be overwhelming. So that stuff happens, and mistakes. Okay, I'm sorry, mistakes and changes. What are some other changes? I would say just a lot of clarification, just defining lanes, like what is your job description? And let's rationalize it. If you are an executive assistant, for example, or if you're kind of the de facto office manager or virtual office manager, then it makes sense for you to be doing these things, but not some of these other things that you've just picked up along the way because nobody else could do them. And let's kind of put everything in boxes and where, okay, these are the boxes, these are the functions that need to happen. And then you've got kind of this overflow box, and some of these things we may not even need to do. These are things that we could stop doing. In other cases, we need to hire somebody to replace them. So, a lot of right seats in right places, or right people in right seats. And sometimes it is changing somebody's job description. They're a great employee. It might be narrowing their focus and allowing it so they're not so overwhelmed, allowing them to be more efficient, and then giving them some day-to-day tools to become more, create some margin in their day to help actually create some of the structures they need to do their job more efficiently, or maybe even this training that they need. But you need to create margin. So, I'm big on cycles, and that's another big function that I play is it's making sure that we have those meeting cycles. People call them like pulses or whatever. But, in EOS, you've got your L10 meeting, just like having a weekly meeting with your team leaders, one-on-one, for alignment, and then having a team meeting, and then also having a meeting, so meetings at every level to align, top down and across the organization. And so having the right meeting cadence, the right meeting format, structure, and content is really important. And that is actually a huge leverage point. Getting people on the same page, people talk about rowing in the same direction, all of that, and that it's easier said than done, especially when you're working, and I'll just add this, I know I've been talking for a long time here, but especially when you're working, you've got a global team working remotely, and potentially part-time. And I'm seeing a lot more companies like that, post-pandemic, where you've got people all over the world, their overlapping time is minimal. They're in far distant time zones. Like, how do you even get the team together to build a culture consistently? It's a challenge.
Mark, I find a lot of what you're saying resonates for sure, because what's going to get a company there with a smaller team is they just have to do whatever it takes, and they have to do pretty much anything and pick up tasks and responsibilities that when you go throughout the years that add up to basically not in what they should be doing anymore, right? As you grow. So
right.
Talk about the hiring process, because like one of the things is when a company is growing, you obviously need to bring on more people at some point to help with those tasks. What are some of the mistakes people make when they are, I imagine, you're joining some hyper growth companies and you need to put SOPs in place while hiring, while doing a million other things as the plane's flying,
Exactly right.
So what are some hiring either mistakes you see people make or things you want to make sure the team is aware of when they are going through the hiring process?
Yeah. So I've seen different kinds of mistakes. One would be hiring somebody who has a very impressive background. Let's say they've worked for a big company, Fortune 500 company, with tons of experience, a great resume, but to work in a small entrepreneurial company. And I've seen that just fail miserably because you think that you're buying kind of the imprimatur of this larger company, and it's just going to magically bring all the organization and capacity of this company. But in fact, somebody who's this is not always the case, but somebody who's been in that environment for a long time is used to everything being in its place, and there's a person who does that. There's a defined procedure for that. That's somebody else's job. That's not my job. And in these entrepreneurial environments, it's more like, no, it's your job. You see a problem, it's your job to figure it out, or at least bring awareness to the team, and we'll figure it out together. And so sometimes, I've seen that happen where especially for higher level roles, you're looking for somebody experienced and to lead a department or, to be a director, and they just can't make that adjustment. Why is everything so vague and crazy here? It's like, well, it's going to be that way for a long time. It's part of the culture, but we're working on it, and some, but kind of embracing ambiguity for as long as necessary until you can't take that anymore, and you need to have greater definition. So that's one mistake. And I think the other one would be, either I can't afford this person, or this person is so promising, they're great. Like this like young talent, young fresh talent, high demand. They're not going to stay with me long term, because they're just, they're gonna use me for 2 years. I've heard this kind of thinking, and then they're going to take off and go somewhere else. Now that may happen, but I think if you set expectations clearly, if you manage them thoughtfully, and if you really try and co-develop a career path for them that aligns with your growth needs as a company, you can find that some of these highly talented, motivated employees who might align with your vision or purpose, for example, will stay with you from, not just 2 years, but 4 years, and then 5 years, 6, 7 years, because they're growing with you. And, so it's a combination of enabling and empowering them to, take risks, to learn, to grow. But, as long as the company is growing, they will have greater opportunities to grow professionally. Because I've seen people not even hire those people. It's like, nah, they're not gonna stay, or they're too much. And being too cheap is another thing too. I think you got to pay for talent, and also realize that, if you have a strong culture, a really good culture, and a real meaningful purpose that you can stand by, and you put your money where your mouth is, and it's a real conviction that you will get talent that you couldn't otherwise afford, because there's a survey that says people give up, knowledge workers, up to 25% of their income, that's their lifetime income, for work that is always meaningful. And those employees, not surprisingly, tend to be the best employees, the most productive. They work the hardest, they work the longest, because they care about what they do. And so that speaks to having a strong culture, which is another part of what I do.
I know one of the companies that you worked with was an agency, so I'd love to hear about how that worked.
Yeah. That was one of these early stage companies. And so there was no real infrastructure, and there was some of the wrong people in the wrong seats. So brought in new people, really worked out the details of standard operating procedures, embedded them in the right tool, had to switch some tools, moved from ClickUp to Asana. I think there, one of the key issues is just aligning the CEO's long-term vision with the company. And I've seen, in a setting, if somebody wants to make a transition to a different, type of role, it needs to be in alignment with what they're currently doing. You know what I mean? Like if if you're looking to make a kind of a career change, and this happens too with entrepreneurs, like they outgrow their first business, or they have a change in their life, an awakening of some sort, or and they want to do something different, but they also want to maintain this first business. And they're kind of half in, half out. Like, it's the trick there is kind of easing the transition, and helping to train people, or hire and or train people to pick up the slack, to do the things that they're currently doing, even things that they're good at. But as long as they're doing those things, they're never going to get out of the role. And so this was that company was an example of that, and I'd say it's still a work in progress. So
I feel like the same things, Mark, that everyone was doing. I mean, I can speak for myself. I've been doing something for a long time. You have these waves of excitement, and you've been doing it for a long time, so sometimes it gets boring, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to either reinvigorate the excitement or put the pieces in place so that you can work on other things. And I also think it's the same things, you can correct me if I'm wrong, to put in place for that is, if you're going to exit a company, you want to exit the company, you just want hyper growth, and you want to work in the business, but you want to exit it at some point in the future, right?
Right. So, yeah. Were you asking a question about that, or
no? I was just commenting. It feels like it's almost very similar. Whether someone wants to, just get it up and running so it's efficient, and the owner doesn't have to do all of the work, is even if they're setting up for hyper growth and want to exit someday, it's kind of the same process, and kind of takes in the frameworks, which is like, I know you mentioned EOS framework, and I mentioned in the very beginning about and you mentioned why people stay is purpose, right? They have a greater purpose. And so I know you learned a lot about the B Corp framework, and I'd love for you to talk about that.
Sure. Yeah, and one thought I had just before I switched to B Corp is simply that if somebody is leaving, and I've seen this again and again, you have to have a really clear plan for what you're going to do after you exit your business, because too often, and a lot of deals fall apart because at the last minute the owner gets cold feet, when they're about to sell the company. It's like, I don't know if playing golf and just playing with my grandchildren, as wonderful as that sounds, is going to be satisfying enough for me. So like, really know what you want to do next. So yeah, B Corp is it's a standards framework. So it's a global standard for social and environmental impact, and it's based on the UN sustainability goals and initiatives. And it's I've been driven, to purpose driven. I've been interested in purpose-driven businesses for a while, and I think this whole starting with purpose, starting with why, because I think I used to feel, like a business, the purpose of business is to make profit for the shareholders, and that most people feel that way. That's kind of your standard shareholder business model. That's Milton Friedman, and that's kind of the predominant model for, at least the last 50 years or so. But that alone is not really enough to motivate me anyway. And turns out I'm not alone. Like, I think most people, they want their work to be meaningful. And so what it means to be purpose-driven can look different. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're explicitly have a social mission, but it's your perspective. How is what I'm doing making the world a better place? And so what I love about B Corp is that they've really, a lot of people have intentions. I want to make a social impact or an environmental impact, and they'll do what they think is making an impact. But of course, if you're not measuring it, you actually don't really know. And what B Corp has done is really come up with measures for social impact. And it's a high standard. It's not easy. But if that's baked into your mission, and that you want to make a social impact, um, you know, this will give you the proof. And this will also hold you accountable because it's a public, if you get B Corp certified, you have to publish your performance on their website each year. So, there's nothing like public accountability to, hold you, again, putting your money where your mouth is, or really having the courage of your convictions. So I love the framework, and like I said, it's a complex. What we were talking about is a complex process to get certified, but you don't need to be certified to actually take advantage of the framework for operating purposes. They have a free assessment you can take, and you can see where you stand. You can see the kinds of things that they measure and the value of those things in terms of their scoring model. You have to score a certain number of points to get certified, and so I see that just as another tool for people who, I mean, it's great if you want to get certified, but you don't necessarily have to get certified to take advantage of it, or that could be a further down the road goal.
When we were
Yeah.
talking before you hit record, one of the things that you think deeply about whether you become B Corp certified or not is thinking about a sustainability statement.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd love for you to expand on that.
Sure. Yeah. Well, so I worked on a course with somebody who does work with certifications, and she's fantastic, and she teaches people how to use their business certification. So minority-owned business, women-owned business, LGBTQ-owned business. These are all certifications you can get, but and again, there's a process involved, and it takes work, time and effort. But just getting a certification alone isn't necessarily going to do anything for your business. You have to learn how to put it to use. And lots of big corporations as well as the government will have initiatives where they're looking to work with more diverse suppliers, vendors, contractors, and so she teaches them how to put those certifications to use. Likewise, with sustainability. So if you want to work with a big corporation or the government, because there is a sustainability imperative, they're going to be looking for a statement of some sort. And that is something that through this course that we're looking to help people do. That's one potential byproduct of the training is like, hey, if you're looking to work with these businesses, you're going to need a sustainability statement. Let's help you prepare one. Here's how you do one. And there's lots of resources you can draw on for that.
Yeah. So it sounds like, there's certain certifications maybe people don't even realize they can go get. And then there's matching that with programs, or companies are looking to work with companies with that specific certification. Is there a website we should point people towards for that, what you're referring to? Or I don't know.
For the course, you mean?
But yeah, for the course. Yeah.
Well, right now it's an Eventbrite invitation. So what you could, one is Diversity Masterminds. That's Liz Cullen Whitehead's website. She's my partner. Great business, great site, great people to work with. So that's Diversity Masterminds. I don't know exactly what the URL is, but
or they can message you. I don't know if you want to give your email. They could.
Sure.
They can go to, vividpathconsulting.com and just, contact you too.
Yeah. It's just simple. It's first name dot last name. So Mark.Scrimenti, Mark with a K, at vividpathconsulting.com.
Got it. So we talked about B Corp as a, valuable framework to look at. You talked about EOS. And another one that you utilize when you bring in working with companies is Scrum.
Right. So I worked for 12 years at an online retail company, and we sold musical instruments, and we grew a lot during that time. And so that's really where I learned a lot about growing an organization. And one of the first things, it was funny because before I started, I don't think I really, that the word operations didn't ignite, great passion in me. I was working, more on the creative side, in marketing and directing the team and so forth. And then it was a process of discovery. I realized I really love building things, and that's what it's all about, as well as the human component, which is at least half the job. But I first thing I did was introduce Agile Scrum. Because to me, so this is it's a lean. It's a lean way of doing things that comes from manufacturing, Toyota, Kaizen, all these concepts. But iterative process. Agile Scrum is great. You have. Do you want me to explain it, or do you think it's?
Yeah, go ahead for sure.
It's a
one of my two favorite on my top books is The Goal, which kind of runs through like a kind of a fable, and then the Scrum. I'm forgetting the book. It's like do twice the work in half the time or something. And Sutherland, I think, wrote it about Scrum essentially.
Yeah. I have not read that particular book, but I'm a huge fan of Scrum, and I got my Scrum Master training. And basically, you're running these short iterative cycles called sprints. We did 2-week sprints. You can do 1-week sprints. You can do 1-month sprints. 2 weeks is common, and you've got a backlog. You got a product backlog, like all the ideas that you could ever possibly do, and theoretically, at least, it's prioritized. And you do this annual planning. And by the way, this Agile Scrum is not incompatible, for example, with EOS. Like I think you can plug it in, and that's one of the things that I like to do is take a great management framework like EOS and shore it up. On the culture side, for example, there are other things you can do. But if you're doing any kind of product development or even operational development, like what I call like ops dev, like you're building infrastructure, put it in the sprint. And we did this actually at the online retailer. We did it not only for IT product development, which because we built all of our software in house, not just the website, but even the back end tools, but even for production processes like the content team, the digital marketing team. They had their own sprints and scrums, just as a way of moving and keeping the work prioritized properly and building momentum. So you meet you have these daily stand-up meetings for 15 minutes. It's like, what did I do yesterday? What am I going to work on today? And what are my obstacles? And that's it. And everybody answers that question, and the Scrum Master helps to relieve the obstacles. And the thing, it goes along with you've probably read the Lean Startup, right? Eric Ries. So this, like the whole thing about like minimum viable product, so going to market quickly. Now I think the other side of this is doing, another framework I've used is jobs to be done theory. And that's where you actually try and figure out, well, what is the problem that I'm solving in the world? And that's another framework. So it's much more qualitative research, where you're talking to customers and you're trying to figure out like what job are we doing for you? And but it's not just the functional aspects of the job. So for example, we sell musical instruments, and I talked to a lot of different customers, and we would do these hour-long interviews. And in them, like, under what circumstances did you buy this guitar from us for the first time? And just have them talk about it. And it takes into account, these emotional factors, circumstantial, economic, and, a lot of whys and just a lot of listening. But you're looking to draw out, actually, why did they buy from you? And it turns out, we had some financing programs that really help people, gave accessibility, helped them to afford instruments that they otherwise couldn't afford. And there was a virtuous cycle of musical development as a result of that. It also made them feel responsible, like financially responsible, because I have a spouse or, significant other. And, if he, she, they, knew that I was spending $1,200 on a guitar, they would freak. But if but $100 a month, that's within our budget, and we can still, go on a date, once a week, and they'll be fine with that. It's responsible. I feel responsible, and there's no interest, by the way, ever. So, but once you figure that out, then you can kind of learn, well, okay, well, what else could we do for this customer? Like with that understanding of why they're buying from us, what else can we do in the way of innovation that would help us sell more, upsell, cross sell, and really retain this customer, and increase this customer's lifetime value. And we were able to, by doing this research, increase, average order sizes and repeat buying rates. And, as a result, you're also decreasing customer acquisition costs because they're coming back to you and you don't have to reacquire them. So that combined with Agile Scrum works really well because, you could be very efficient at building the wrong thing, and that's another problem. People don't take the time to do the research. They think they know. That's a whole kind of other conversation about, product management, product development, people assuming that, and I've worked for people like that before too, where like I've been in this business, I am going to design this product, and I'm going to spend, over $1 million of my own money to build it because I know this is what the market needs. Like, you know what, you didn't, that's not the right way to build it. And then turns out it goes to market. It's like, oh, this is great, but it's not configurable and everybody wants it to be configurable. So now you're going to have to take it apart, modularize it and put it back together again. If you had done the research up front, you could have avoided that. So anyway, huge fan. Sorry, it's a tangent there, but
no, I love that because Mark, I've heard you talk about really talking to the customers being so critical and so important. I love when you talk about it. And I've heard you tell stories about, some of those emotional reasons that there's no way you would know unless you ask the customer, right?
Right. You can guess, but you're just guessing. And that's the same thing when it comes to testing too, like in doing real testing, like with a control group. Like if you don't set up a control group, set up a test the right way, you don't know cause and effect, and you don't know what's making an impact. You're just guessing, and still too many guys. Even though we're swimming in data, and that amount of data is growing, like doubling every year. People don't, the vast majority of it goes unanalyzed or unused.
Mark, I have one last question before I ask it. I just want to thank you for sharing your stories. And I love when you talk about the customer experience and talking to the customers and some of the frameworks. And I just want to, point people to check out your website, Vivid Path Consulting, to learn more. And, just to listen and look at the B Corp framework, EOS, you talked about Scrum, jobs to be done. And, this has been great. My last question is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you played D1 rugby.
I did. So, but only my freshman year. Go ahead.
It's pretty hardcore when I saw that, and so I wanted to ask what you learned from playing rugby, because that's a pretty intense. Intense is probably an understatement sport to play in, where someone's like, you can break your leg pretty easily. So what have you learned from rugby, playing it at the collegiate level?
That's funny that you asked that question. It wasn't prepared to answer, but it's a great question, and it's a good question to answer on the spot. So I will tell you this: I was probably one of the smaller guys on the team, but that that didn't stop me from being aggressive but as I said, I only played for 1 year. So I played my freshman year, and I never played rugby before.
Oh, really?
And well, I played football in high school, but I didn't even play varsity. I played JV, and then anyway. But I wanted to do a sport. I wanted to do something, and rugby just seemed cool. And I tried to play lacrosse, and I didn't go to prep school, so I didn't know how to play lacrosse, and it was really hard to catch something in that ball. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to try rugby. It's kind of a brute force thing, and like I can get out my energy that way. And I played for a year, and we had a good team. It was like at the time we were like top 10 in the nation. These are club sports. If you know anything about rugby players too, they're crazy. Like by the end of the night, everybody's like, drunk, naked, and singing songs. That's kind of like how it goes. But for me, okay, it's like you're up against this guy, the big guy, like 6'3", 225. And it's like, you got to tackle that guy, bring him down. It's like, and I did it. But, after about a year of that, I'm like, you know what, I'm going to probably get killed if I keep doing this. Like I value my body, my head a little too much to continue with this long term, but it was fun while I did it. I'm glad I did it. I do remember chasing one guy down who was about to score, and somebody's like, where did that come from? Like, where did that energy come? I don't know, but I saw him about to score and I wasn't going to let that happen. And so I think it kind of, I loved playing football as a kid. And I think there's something about that energy. It's hard to reproduce anywhere else. It's like very physical, very, I probably testosterone driven. And I did it then. I couldn't, I break I hurt my back playing bocce ball these days. So like, that's kind of what it's come to.
No, I appreciate that. I figured there was a good story, good reason behind it. And I want everyone could check out your website, check out Mark Scrimenti, like you said, on LinkedIn, and check out vividpathconsulting.com. And Mark, I'm going to be the first one to thank you. Thanks so much for sharing.
Thank you, Jeremy. It's great to be on here. I really appreciate being on your show.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I'm feeling like $100 grand.